Hi everyone, Ryan Dobson here for the Dr. Jeff Show. Summit camps are in full swing and kids are having a blast. In fact, my own son Lincoln is attending right now. There are so many kids who want to go to camp at Summit, but they just need a little help. A generous donor has agreed to match every donation to the Summit Summer programs. Will you help a child learn the foundations of a Christian worldview at Summit? Donate online at summit.org/match, and every tax-free donation will be doubled. Again, you can find that at summit.org/match. God bless, and let's join the Dr. Jeff Show.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Dr. Jeff Show podcast. This show is available on Apple, Google, Spotify, Liftable, Edify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please check it out on those places. Leave reviews. You can leave reviews in more than one place. Let everybody know that you like the show. Tell your friends about it. All around the world, people are listening to the Dr. Jeff Show podcast and learning that there are ways you can connect with these thought leaders who are showing that worldview changes everything. Every week I get to interview somebody new. This week I'm going to interview Dr. Daniel Spanjer. We have got a fascinating conversation before us about how Jesus is seen in every aspect of the Bible, even in what we call the Old Testament. Some people think old, bad, new, good. But all of Scripture is a revelation about Jesus. We're going to talk about that. And we're even going to get into why we ought to take history more seriously and what historians actually do. What a wild conversation. It's going to be a lot of fun. Thanks for joining on the show today. Dr. Daniel Spanjer, welcome to the Dr. Jeff Show.
Thank you, Dr. Jeff. Glad to be here.
It's fun to have you here. We first met several years ago. You came out to one of the Summit Ministries adult conferences, and then for a couple of years, we had a Summit Ministries program on your campus.
That's right.
At Lancaster Bible College. And I loved the place. I'm very sad that it didn't work out. Turns out that people want to come to Colorado in the summertime.
Oddly enough, Lancaster's not the
Lancaster,
place.
Pennsylvania.
Huh? We have Amish. Amish. Okay.
They loved all of that, the ones who came.
Yeah.
But that site didn't work out for us permanently, but we left with an enduring love of LBC and the people who were there and the leadership and the professors we had the opportunity to work with. And you're one of them.
Yeah.
So what came out of that was a relationship that enables us now to host you as a speaker here in our Summit Ministries programs in Colorado, and then also at the Summit Semester program.
Right.
Which is really in depth, like a 3-month-long summit to help students really learn how to think, read, dialogue, and write biblically in community with other young adults. So thanks for your investment in the lives of so many Summit students.
I am so grateful. It's amazing when you teach how much you learn. And teaching students and watching the questions they ask them, where they grapple, just takes things to a different level for me as a professor, especially when you're that intense and you're with them that long. It's not like you're just one-off in the class and out.
That's right.
You're sharing life through all of this. So I grow probably as much, if not more than they do. So I'm grateful.
They have a whole week with you, right?
Usually, at least 3 or 4 days. And it's fairly intense. And as you can tell by the way I talk, I don't talk slowly. And it's not easy. But they all endure it really, really well.
Well, one of our graduates of the Summit Semester program is producing in the Summit virtual event right now. So we're running multiple programs here. We're doing podcasting in my office, which is why we have microphones, because our studio is being used for our Summit virtual program, and 200 students are in that, and then 185 students are here in person. So lots of things are happening, but the producer said, I can't wait for you to interview Dr. Dan Spanjer. You're going to love this guy because he was at Summit Semester and he said A, B, C, D, and she started going through the whole thing. She remembered it all.
She remembered. That's fabulous.
Yeah. So I can't wait to dig in. Now, you're a historian.
Correct.
We're going to talk about theology a little bit today, and we're going to talk about history. And I think because we've got about 30 minutes, I think we can dig in pretty deep on a couple of things. But one thing that you mentioned that I'm really interested in, I have a lot of questions about, and I bet the people who are listening or watching have a lot of questions too. You helped your church put together a study book called The Advent is the Story.
Correct.
And that comes out as a book in September, you mentioned. Yeah. All right, so we're recording this summer 2022, and here in a little while, this book will come out, and this will help people get ready for Christmas time.
Right.
And it is, Jesus is at the center of the biblical story. And then the Jesus is actually the what we call the Old Testament, right? Some our Jewish friends call Torah.
Right.
What some other friends, it's interesting, different terminology, have now started to call the First Testament, because old and new implies a value judgment. One is, well, that's
old and
that's
past.
old.
And,
that's in the past.
Right.
The New Testament is what
one
really
has mothballs and one sounds like they smell like the new car. Right?
Exactly. It's exactly right. So we want to go back in Scripture with understanding the life of Christ, the birth of Christ as the hinge point on which history turns.
Right.
But then you go back and look at the Old Testament and you see Jesus
That's right.
in the pages of the Old Testament,
Right.
which I think is fascinating.
Yeah.
And in fact, there's a children's book, the Jesus Storybook Bible by
I've heard of
Sally
this,
Lloyd Jones.
Yeah, I haven't read it yet.
I could read it to you if
Okay.
you want.
It'd be enjoyable. I would appreciate that.
I read it to my kids when they were little. It really helped me. Sometimes when you read children's stories, when you're an adult, you think, oh, that has meaning that I didn't realize all that time ago.
Right.
Some books don't, like Go Dog Go. I'm
Never
not
got
sure.
much out of that
Yeah,
one.
I never.
Yeah.
I looked at that recently. It's still.
Why did we read that?
We read it. It was fairly
Kids
pointless.
required it, yeah.
Well, it's because it's easy to read and it's funny. But
Right.
But you have other books like The Velveteen Rabbit, and you look back and you think that was profound.
Yeah.
That's profound, the message in that story. Well, so the Jesus Storybook Bible is like that. But what you're doing is kind of like what the Jesus Storybook Bible is for children. You're now doing for adults, which gives us a chance this coming Christmas season to help people go deep.
Yeah.
All right. Having said all of that.
Okay.
Let's start looking back. What are some of the, when you say you see Jesus all through for Old Testament, the First Testament, Torah, what is it? Talk about what that means.
Sure. Yeah. So I think in theology we say a couple things about seeing Jesus, right? Certainly we see certain aspects of his office as prophet, priest, and king, and we see those develop. And I think theologians have done a wonderful job. I think what we miss sometimes is who Jesus is, not what he does. So who is he? The real problem for all of us begins when we become separated from Yahweh. Yahweh is our meaning, our truth. He's our beauty. When we sin, we fall from him. So the question is, how does Yahweh now begin to bridge the gap? But he doesn't just bridge the gap merely by building a bridge or speaking to us. He has to actually create conditions under which he can actually, the infinite holy God, can come to us somehow. And we can be returned back to him. And I think oftentimes in order to see Jesus, we want to get to John 1, which is awesome. But you have to deal with actually Genesis 3, because it's how God begins the story of that bridge. I often tell it this way, that you can say the Bible is a story of two buildings. The one building is man's attempt to restore himself to God in the Tower of Babel. But right after that piece is a failed attempt by the people, the next is the story of the temple. Yeah. And it's the story of now how has God, one piece at a time, been building the framework for how he creates a space for us to engage him. And I think we forget sometimes how detailed that story is, and it's never complete. We see that, and of course Christ makes this point, even when it comes to the point of the temple. The temple was never meant to be final. I will tear this down and rebuild it in 3 days. But there's so much detail in how God lays the groundwork for that relationship to be reconstructed, that when Jesus comes, I think it was supposed to be an aha moment for the Jews to say, oh, that's what the temple was. Oh, that's what the sacrifice was. So I don't think, and I think you made a good point off camera where he said, we want to be careful not to simply just go back and read Jesus into everything. But actually what happens is you read the problem into the Old Testament, to which there's really only one solution at the other side.
Yes.
And that's Christ.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. That helps me so much, because I do want to be careful that we're not just saying, oh, well, and that, because we now have this understanding. We sort of take that and then reframe all of our previous experiences. But what you're saying is it's actually the other way around.
Amen.
There was this is where humanity was. By the time you read Genesis 1, 2, and 3, the creation of the world, the man and the woman, the fall. Right. And by the time you get to Genesis 6, God said he wished that he had never made them. They were that evil. Right. And then you start to see that there's this problem that everyone faces. And it does seem, I haven't encountered a worldview yet that doesn't say there is something wrong with the world that needs to be fixed.
Exactly.
It could be, the Marxist worldview says what's wrong with the world is that people are oppressed. And the reason they're oppressed is because their material resource, the material world is all there is, and the material resources have been withheld from them. And so we need to have a revolution. But for everybody, they know there's something wrong.
Right.
Okay, I'm just processing all of this aloud.
Well, and so look, if I can springboard off of that, I think what we often see as wrong is things aren't working.
Yeah.
Right. So say, well, there's death and there's disease, there's fighting. Those aren't the problem. Those are the symptoms of the problem. The problem is we don't have our Yahweh. The problem is we're not in relationship with He who is the true, the good, and the beautiful, and the hope of every heart and the yearning of nights. I say every problem and every human effort to overcome Marxism, even in the ancient time, monarchies, all of these were really interesting human solutions that never actually addressed the true problem. So, if you look at the ancient ziggurats and temples, they actually had it backwards. They built spaces for the gods to come down so that we could feed them. And the whole point there was to give the gods what they lacked. And if they stayed out of our way and we stayed out of their way, hopefully we wouldn't have been war or something that happened.
Right.
Misses the point that actually it's not keeping them at arm's length, so that they don't annoy you or threaten your life. The point is to actually have one of them, God, Yahweh, invite us into relationship with Him, and the absence of that relationship is why all of these things happen. And I think this is where we even sometimes misunderstand. Christ wasn't coming to fix our disease. He was coming to show us that disease is the result of a broken relationship between He and us.
Yes.
And so how much of our story in the Old Testament is God trying? He speaks without accident, clearly. It's us who don't get it. But He clearly shows all of these are just consequences of the real problem. And so seeing Jesus isn't hard because He's the incarnate Yahweh in our midst. That absence is the cause of all our problems. I think sometimes the First Testament, however you want to say it, we don't realize that's what this story is trying to tell us. It's not trying to just tell us, here's what's going on, here's the plan, here's why things go wrong. It's trying to say, don't you see Yahweh is all you've ever wanted and needed. And when we come to the end of the Old Testament, we realize there's never been a time when we've had it unless He comes to us, which I think is what John's point in John 1.
Yeah.
Following.
I think most of the people who are watching or listening have had some training in worldview and maybe some training in theology. But I'd love to have you talk a little bit more about that idea. You said the source of the problem is that we don't have our Yahweh or have a broken relationship with our Yahweh. So you've got kind of two big terms in the Old Testament for God. You have the Elohim, the God, and then you have Yahweh, our God. You have the creator God, the relator God, or I'm not sure exactly how to describe it.
Sure.
But when you use the term Yahweh, can you talk a little bit more about what that means?
Right.
Because that helps us set the stage for Christ.
Excellent. Yeah, and that's a great way to say it, Jeff, because I think what the Jews knew about the term Yahweh was this is the unspeakable God. And I think what sometimes we miss as Christians, we've made God very relatable, which is only true because of Christ. But we don't realize there's a profound distance between a God who's as holy as Yahweh. So it was only the tetragram, right? You could only say the 4 letters. He was so holy you couldn't even name His name. And I've done this before when I've worked with students and say, try to find Jesus after you've engaged Yahweh through the Scriptures. Try not to start with Jesus and then go back and read the Old Testament, because what the Jews understood was that God was so holy and so transcendent that He had to be held at arm's length, that He couldn't be seen.
Yep.
And that's why to know that we need to be brought back to Him is the major problem, because it's an insurmountable gap. And R.C. Sproul has done a lot on this, I know, in his career too, but I think we've missed some of those terms. So that Jesus at the end doesn't become really necessary. I mean, He likes us. I'm glad He likes me. Yeah, but He bridged the infinite gap between a holy God and me, who ought not be in that space at all. And so if you realize that's your problem, then Jesus becomes the only solution to it. And so I think you're right. Saying Yahweh is important because it reminds us of exactly how the Jews knew they had to interact with Him. I think of in Exodus 32 and 33, after Moses, stands in the gap really and says to God, don't kill these people because of the golden calf, save them, and this is your reputation too, know. And God finally says, you know what, I'll relent. And then Moses says, let me see your glory. And he said, you can't. You will perish in an instant. And I think even Moses for a second there lost himself, right?
Yes.
God's relatable. Look, he did a nice thing. And he said, no, you don't understand exactly who I am yet. Not even you, Moses, and all of your wonder can actually bridge this gap. This is an infinite gap.
Yeah. Man, I love this conversation. I love the way you approach the theology with the heart of a historian.
No one says heart of a historian, by the way, Jeff. I appreciate that.
Nobody says that?
Now it's the mind of a historian,
No, I think
history.
yeah, sure. I get the mind of his story, but the heart of his story.
No, I love it.
Because you haven't mentioned Schleiermacher one time. You haven't mentioned Boltzmann or
not
Moltmann,
once.
or,
Not once.
So this way of understanding history, though, I really want to dig into because I have to be honest with you. I dreaded taking my university history class so much that I waited. We had one required history unit. That was it. Just one required class. I waited until my senior year to take that class and loved it.
Oh, really?
I loved it so much. I loved my professor. I can picture him to this day just walking back and forth in front of the class in the well with this goofy grin on his face and bedhead. He's had his hair stuck straight up, which I kind of relate to these days. And I loved it and regretted then that I had missed all the opportunities to study with that history faculty at my university.
Yeah.
So I did start going back and studying it on my own. But historians don't just look at things that happen in the past.
Right.
They have a framework to help us understand the meaning of things that happened in the past. Yeah. And so your doctorate is in history.
Correct.
And I'd love to just have you talk about that for a minute. I just have in mind, maybe some of the people who are listening now think, I probably should study history more. I should better understand history from a biblical worldview.
Yes,
or maybe they're thinking, I think maybe academics should be something I take seriously as a potential calling.
Yeah, amen. Just so everyone knows, Dr. Jeff just recommended history, so now you know you have to do it. Yeah, that's a great question. I think I didn't like history until I got to college, and then in grad school really realized what it was. That was so wonderful, and you've captured it in a nut in that history. I often tell students, if you had to capture the last 10 days and just list the facts, how big would that book have to be? Well, it'd be nearly infinite.
Yeah.
So history is all about selecting facts. And then you say, well, why do you select a fact? Well, because it's important. Okay, now we're in it. So what makes something important?
Yes.
And I think then all of a sudden it becomes this really creative enterprise. History is not. My professors who not historians always joke with me, history must be boring, nothing ever changes. But, I get that line. Little do they know, a new book comes out on the American Revolution every year, like clockwork.
Yep.
Because interpreting humanity is really, really difficult. And we have this amazing, and I say to students, history is probably 90% imagination and 10% facts. You can't change the facts. They're crucial. But it's how you imagine those connections actually work. And here's the key word, why did they happen? Like, I can tell you George Washington crossed the Delaware, very easy. Why? Man, there is a really complex subject, and it requires knowing humans and psychology and the moment and the historical context that they're in.
That's right. And so, the British strategy.
Right.
And what Washington knew he had the capacity to do with his army and what he didn't have the capacity to do. I mean, there are a million different things. Yeah.
Right. And so what comes out of it is, and I know there was one of the speakers this morning, Dustin, was talking about myth, and I think he did a really good job of saying myth is an overwrought word in the modern terms because we imagine somehow that if you get all the facts added up right, you'll have an objective view of the past. There's no such thing. You don't want one, by the way. It would be boring, plain, and it wouldn't teach us anything. But if you're learning about humanity, it takes interpretation and imagination to rescribe that and go, yeah, why did he do that? What if we missed it the whole time? Maybe there's another fact we've got to account for and we can explain it differently. When you start doing that, you realize that history is a wonderfully creative space to function. And you also learn that no two historians will ever agree. Between three historians, there's 4 different opinions, right? I mean, that's just the way it is with historians. But
it's the dialogue that takes place that is the fun part. But that's super hard to capture. As you mentioned, I mean, people can put out a book. But most historians I know, when you read their book, you're looking at their tentative thesis rather than their final conclusion about the way they're putting things together.
No, that's exactly right. And I tell students when you read it, students oftentimes they'll see a history book and they'll read it and think, oh, I guess that's what happened. Well, no, that's what that person thought most likely happened. But they've selected out of the 5 billion facts, they've selected the 200 that make sense to them. The next historian, and you're right, that historian in 20 years will rewrite that book when they realize they found new things or they think of humanity differently.
Yeah.
So history is not as boring as simply just a compilation of facts. It has to be at some point an imaginative reinterpretation that makes it meaningful and significant. That's why. And what do you learn in the process? And this is the thing. I don't learn why revolutions happen. I learn who human beings are. And what human beings go through and what they wrestle with. And I don't have to live in the American Revolution now to experience some part of what they went through. And so why wouldn't you take advantage of this tremendous, as the founders called it, laboratory of human emotion and experience where you could learn how much about yourself in the process?
Yeah.
And I think that's where history becomes really valuable.
Wow. I can imagine how much fun it would be to teach history where you do in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is so rich with American history.
Yeah.
If you drive an hour east, you're in Valley Forge.
Yep.
If you drive an hour west, you're in Gettysburg.
Yeah.
Right?
It's
and
wonderful.
between Valley Forge and Gettysburg, you cover a huge part of American history.
Yeah.
Do you get to take students on those kinds of things?
Yeah, we do.
experiences?
We do. I think the college schedule being what it is gets
Yeah, it's
difficult
hard.
to actually
Yeah.
make those things happen. But we've done it more probably in recordings and things like that. We can post those
Yes.
resources than we have with students. But it probably happens more in secondary school than often happens in college.
Yeah.
Although I have a colleague who teaches on history also, usually Civil War. He will try to get students out to Philadelphia if he can, and then also out to Gettysburg, which
Yeah.
is usually very fruitful trips. Yeah.
I love when I go to a city and I see the buses pull up and lots of little kids get off the bus. I actually find myself praying, God, give them some meaning
Right.
to this. Make it something more than just we're out of school for the day and we get a sack lunch, and all of that.
And I get to poke my friend in the back of the bus.
Yeah, make it something, make it something that really plants some good seeds. But I love seeing it. I love that teachers do that. And this is still a big deal.
Right.
In the part of the country where you live,
Sure.
where if you're a bus ride away from Philadelphia, then we are going to Philadelphia and we're going to go to the Constitution Museum and all the different things. But I'd like to talk a little bit about American history, if that's all right, because you've outlined a way of understanding history from a biblical viewpoint that's going to be a lot different than the way a lot of historians think of it. Some people think of history as cyclical.
Sure.
Like Oswald Spengler or George Santayana. Others think of it as, from the goo to you, right?
That's good. I like that.
But there are all these different views. But you're talking about the arc of history in a very different way than most of us were ever taught it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think what history does for us, I think there are cycles. Peter Kraft makes a good point about this. Humans go back and forth between poles. It's a pretty common human experience. But I think there has to be some sense in which there's a grand narrative happening. Now, the problem is the historian doesn't know what the grand narrative is from the facts, right? What did God want to do with the American Revolution? I have no idea. He didn't reveal that to me. But what he did allow me to see is how human beings have to interact with the ultimate truths.
Yes.
What's ultimately meaningful. They don't go into war because they're bored, they have nothing to do. They're grappling with something. I often say this, that what you study in history are people trying to turn earth into heaven, most likely transforming it into hell.
Wow.
Right? That's the
Say that
common,
again.
Yeah, so most often people try to transform earth into heaven and usually just succeed in transforming it into heaven.
Wow.
And if you think about a lot of dictators, and that's what I try to get students to see, they're made with the image of God, so they see the world as broken, and they think they understand what's broken about it. So let's track how they tried to bring it about. And did they succeed in fixing something? Sure. Even states that are evil found some ways to do some good things. But ultimately, they're going to fail. And so the attempt is a image of God in you attempt. And this is the arc I think maybe you're referring to, is that's an arc of human history that's a constant from tribal societies up to modern societies. It's not like they're any less advanced. They're grappling with the same human problem we're all grappling with.
Yeah.
And they have a limited set of solution sets they're using. And I say, can you get inside their mind and appreciate they're dealing with heavy problems, and this is the solution they've chosen. But of course, at the end of the day, this is the wonderful part, Jeff. This is where I love. Usually somewhere at the end, I'll say, so what did we look at? We look at republics, monarchies. Which one of these worked? To this degree, to that degree. What do we know? Come, Lord Jesus, and quickly.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, the human beings, as wonderful as they are at amazing things, they cannot answer the one thing we all need, and the proof is in the pudding. What society has not failed?
Yeah.
What society, in all of its best intentions, even America, as much as I love it, has not created problems with every good thing that they've solved? One problem solved is 10 created, right? This is the normal human condition. And when you're honest about that and you look in, I think as a Christian, you become more convinced that humans are not the answer to their own problems.
Yes.
It's just not.
Yeah.
It becomes too obvious.
Yeah. What would you say, because I like to read history now. I repented from my lack of interest as an undergraduate.
We accept that repentance in historical societies everywhere.
In fact, I did my master's thesis on history as a rhetorical device.
Oh, nifty.
Because I was in the speech communication department coaching debate while I was getting my master's degree, and how people sort of harness the events of the past, interpret them, and use that as an argument for what our future course should be.
Perfect.
So we were talking about that. That's what I felt like that was my full penance, writing a master's thesis.
Yeah, that's right. You paid more than enough.
I paid more than enough. But I still love reading about it. I love reading not just what happened in these situations, but how the author, as a guide, is helping bring me into the situation so I can kind of understand it from the inside out.
Right.
But in a way, that's, if we were to put a word to it, that word would be incarnation.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I was just reading Georges Flavrovsky's article. He had a nice little essay in his works on Christian and history. And he makes exactly the same. He doesn't use that word, but he says, if we were objective facts, like a scientist, I don't need to get inside of those. I'm just measuring things. But if I have another human being, then immediately, because they are meaningful, I have a route, a bridge into their mind and heart where I can actually understand them. And that's the whole point, to get to know them. And I think in one sense we get to know ourselves better. But then I can actually know this person because they're also human. So I hadn't thought of using incarnation in that sense, but I think there's truth to that.
Yeah. So every little story that we read about, there's a big story behind it that the truth of which enables us to gain understanding of all those little stories.
And that's a tricky piece. I think all historians are wrong to some degree, which is why all history is somehow myth making.
Yeah.
Because the explanation you're going to bring is limited. It's not going to entail things. It's going to have to twist things because you can't understand everything entirely. And the other part I always try to tell students is, if the way I'm understanding the American Revolution is not probably how someone in 1778 understood it.
Yeah.
Because, as Flavrovsky mentions, I can't see 1778 without seeing 1781. Right. He didn't get to see that.
Great point. Yep.
Yeah. And so, like, if I love doing World War II history with students and saying, at what point did America know they were going to win this thing? Okay, well, you see the war very differently when you don't know you're going to win it. Then I look at it now and go, oh, don't worry, Guadalcanal was fine because they were going to get through that.
Yeah.
That's not what they were thinking.
Yeah.
This, we may not get out of this alive. Right?
Right.
That changes the motivations and why you're fighting and what you're learning from fighting.
Yeah. So good. That's really good. I love it. Well, I want to think. I'm just curious too, because I know you love. You grew up on a farm.
I did.
And so you love farming.
Yeah.
You love auto mechanics. You love the things that are hands-on as well.
Yeah.
And we did get a chance to talk about that. I meant to ask you at the outset of it, and I didn't.
Oh.
Do you see any relationship between the kinds of things that you do like that every day and the sort of things that you do academically? Because I remember this guy, Matthew Crawford, wrote a book called Shop Class as Soulcraft. And he was a motorcycle mechanic and also a political scientist.
Quite a combination.
It's quite a combination.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious how do you see that as, this is what I do to kind of get away from my academic work? Or is this, how do you see the being an academic just as part of being a human?
That's actually a great question. And I think one of the things I love the most about history, and this is why I try to teach history, is it's a set of complex problems, right? So you lay out a problem. So you're a colonist. This is, what would you do about that? And the students come up with a typical trite answer. Well, you would fight. No, why? Wait a minute. What's that going to mean for your family? So you're going to run off to war now. Your wife's back at home taking care of the farm. She's got no means of paying for it. There's no government running in to help her cover this. So you've got a huge set of problems. And what I've tried to tell students, and this is a great point you're making, actually, because what I love about mechanics and that sort of world is it's entirely problems to solve. And so it's not just a set of instructions. You just do this and the car runs. You've got to figure out. You've got to tell yourself a story. Wait a minute. A car normally runs this way. That's going wrong. Well, I'll connect it this way. And you tell yourself this magnificent story. Well, it must be shorting out here. And then all of a sudden you realize you're wrong. You got to retell the story again. History is really very similar in the sense that something's not right about the situation. So how would you tell the story so you can get from, let's say 1932 to Churchill's takeover and right fighting of the war? Right. Well, that's a problem I can't explain. Well, I'm going to tell this story. It doesn't have that fact. I'll retell the story. So I think problem solving, and I've actually learned that there's two, in my mind, two ways of doing history. One's more a poetic way of doing it, which you've read history, so you kind of know, you talk rhetoric. It's a more poetic approach to telling history. The other, in my mind, is a problem solving. How do you get from this point to that point and cover all the facts at the same time? And if your story you tell leaves that one out, retell the story. Similar to, I think, solving a problem, let's say, in the mechanical arena, which is what really attracts me to it.
Yeah. When you, with that approach, you're probably constantly thinking about reflecting on our own times
Yes.
My lifespan, your lifespan.
Right.
What has happened during our lives, and what do you see happening now? I wonder if you'd comment on that, because if at the end of this show you just say this is relevant. Mm-hmm. Being a historian is relevant to everything. Being an academic, that's relevant. That's not something that I have to, that's not just me getting the degree so I can get a job, but there's real thought if you're a Christian, and how all of this comes together from Jesus all the way back to all of history that led up to Jesus and all the way to now.
Right. Yeah, I think where moderns miss this and this is what I think a lot of the modern left is missing, is there's no sense of disconnecting from history. As if history is all corrupt, everyone got it wrong and we're getting it right. You are, in some way or another, a construct of this historical framework. So when I go through the Enlightenment and I start unpacking, that's really interesting, usually around the 17th, early 18th century. I start putting in terms, and students' lights go on and go, wait a minute, is that why we think, this isn't some great solution. We are a derivative of these ideas that have come down. So don't think that somehow you've finally landed on the solution. They've been dealing with the very same problem in the 1780s and 90s that you and I are dealing with. And we haven't changed all that much. I mean, it's, Carl Trueman, I think, has shown that, the ideas have spun out a little wider than they were intended. Yeah. But in a sense, they're still following the same trajectories. And I think it's really helpful to realize you're not some genius that just came up with this. And if you understand how your ideas connect, you might then be able to be critical of them a little and go, that's why I think maybe I need to think twice about that. I ask the students all the time, I said, do you think you live in the same universe that Moses did? Because Moses didn't know anything about viruses. If you told Moses you should take a shot, he wouldn't know what you're talking about. So how is your world that different than his? And maybe you ought to think he had a bead on life in the world that you don't, because you've been influenced by another set of...
Yes.
And so to get out of your skin and your mind into someone else's teaches you sometimes, that's why I believe that. That's not necessarily the truth. That's what I've been handed. So how do I recorrect that to bring that back into alignment with the scriptures? Sometimes that's really difficult to do, but I think to one degree or another way I'll have to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm so glad that you are here having an influence on our
Jeff.
students, and I love conversations like this. And I look forward to reading the Advent.
Yeah.
The Advent is the storybook when it comes out. And just super grateful for your time this afternoon.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff. I really enjoyed this and appreciate all your leadership here at Summit. It's a wonderful place.
Thanks to my guest today, Dr. Dan Spanjer, for joining on the Dr. Jeff Show. You can find this new book that he's talking about called Advent is the Story, Seeing the Nativity Throughout Scripture, wherever great books are sold. You're going to find out how Moses, Isaiah, Micah, and other biblical writers predicted the coming of Jesus and give us a new understanding of all of Scripture. I really appreciate your joining this week. Thanks for being a fan of the Dr. Jeff Show. Thanks for being the kind of person who wants to listen to a program like this and be a difference maker. That means a lot to me. I'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Dr. Jeff Show. And don't forget, you can help a child attend Summit Summer Session by going to summit.org/match. All your donations that are tax deductible will be doubled. God bless, have a great week, and we'll see you next time for another Dr. Jeff Show.
Listeners, I want you to know that our podcast is on Edify, which is a truly powerful app that brings together thousands of the best Christian podcasts in one place for your listening enjoyment. You can download it at Edify, EDIFI.app. Be sure to share this show if you have enjoyed listening to it. And leave a review, if you would, on the site where you download the show. That helps more people know about the Dr. Jeff Show. And I'll look forward to seeing you next week.